We get paid when the brakes are released on the plane. I don't think a lot of people understand that. The training process was grueling. I don't think many people realize how intense training is. It was one of the harder things I've done in my life.
So, what are some common misconceptions about being a flight attendant?
The biggest misconception about being a flight attendant is
Have you ever wondered what it's like being a flight attendant? Or maybe it's a career that you're interested in pursuing today. Whether you're a potential future flight attendant or just a curious passenger, this episode is going to be one of our most interesting, I think, because my guest today is none other than your host, Betty Hurd. Betty, in addition to being the host of the Travel Lemming podcast, is also in her day job a full-time flight attendant. And we're going to do a special episode today where we're going to just go in and dive into all of the little bits and things that you wanted to ask about what it's like to become a flight attendant. I know I have a long list of questions. It's going to be a really long episode. We've got a lot to get through. But first, Betty, how are you doing today?
Hi, Nate. I am doing awesome. I'm so excited to tell everybody about my life as a flight attendant. So, we've got a great episode coming up.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you. I've got a lot of questions, but I want to mention to all the listeners out there, if there's something I'm not covering, but you have a question for Betty, you can go ahead and leave that as a comment on our YouTube. So just search for the Travel Lemming Podcast YouTube if you're not listening to this on YouTube already, and just leave a comment there. And then Betty, hopefully you'll be able to go through and try to answer some of them.
Absolutely. I am here for you all. I definitely love to answer questions about my job. There's a lot of different things that people don't seem to understand about it because it's a very unique work environment. So, any questions you have for me, I will be on YouTube answering those as soon as this episode is posted.
Awesome. Well, I've got a lot of my own. So let's go ahead and dive right in to talking about what it's like as a flight attendant. I am super interested in this. Obviously, I've been flying a ton for the last decade or more. Why don't you tell us just a bit about, why you chose to become a flight attendant and then talk a bit about kind of how that came about?
Yeah, so I never really knew that I wanted to be a flight attendant until much later in my life. I know for a lot of people, I think they say, oh, my whole life, like that was my dream job to be a flight attendant. And that just was not the case for me. To take it back a little bit, I was born and raised in Tucson, grew up there my whole life, went to college there. So I got my degree in journalism. I always thought I'd be a reporter. And unfortunately, I graduated during 2020, and everyone knows what happened in 2020. COVID just threw a wrench in everyone's plans. So before that happened, my plan was to become a reporter or at least get some job that had to do with the news or journalism and get out of Tucson. Not
Like
that
like being a podcast host.
exactly my dreams have come true. No, but I really didn't think that I would be staying in Tucson for long. And again, not because I don't love it. It's just that I always wanted to leave it. I felt like it had run its course in my life. So when COVID hit and I was in lockdown for however long it took, I only got freelance jobs writing remotely straight out of college. Reporting wasn't an option. So I felt very lost at the time. I had a really great friend in college and he started dating this girl who was a flight attendant. And the first time I met her, I remember just talking her ear off about how that worked, how she got the job, what she liked about it. And that kind of was in the back of my mind for several months. And then I actually went through a breakup. And that was when I really was like, okay, I need to get out of Tucson. This was probably like end of 2021. And so I'd been in lockdown. I had felt like my life is just not going the way I wanted it to go. And then when with that event, I really was like, it's time for me to go. And weirdly enough, that week that happened, my friend's girlfriend, the flight attendant, texted me and said, "Hey, my company just opened job applications for the first time since COVID." And I was like, this is a sign, like I have to apply. So that was really the start of it. That was in August of 2021. I sent in my application that day that she texted me. And it took a really long time for me to actually get to the point where I was going to training. It was like a full 6 months from application to training start date, which isn't typical. It was just a weird time with COVID. But yeah, that was the beginning of it all for me. So I'll tell you a little bit about the interview process. So I submitted the application. They sent me a questionnaire where I record myself answering these questions and it's timed. So that's part two. Then many, many months later, like in November, they emailed me about a video interview. And so I had thought during that whole intern period, I had no communication from them. I thought that they had nixed me from the list, that I didn't make the cut. And so in November, I was like, okay, I'm still in this. They do the video interview. And then from there, they said, okay, you're going to do the in-person interview at our headquarters next month. So they send me to headquarters. And for anybody who's interested in becoming a flight attendant, this is the most important part of the interview process is this in-person interview. And it's because they're trying to see how you interact with people. So if you're someone who has the most impressive resume anyone's ever seen versus someone who's never had a job in their life, the person who's going to get the job is the one who they can see does really well on a team, someone who's friendly and approachable. If that person who's never had a job before comes off way more of a like a people person than the person with the impressive resume, they're going to get the job. That's what they care about so much because you are the face of the airline as a flight attendant and your people skills really, really matter. So that in-person interview, I was really nervous about it, but it actually ended up being kind of fun where we were just kind of doing a lot of teamwork, a lot of group scenarios. There was like one one-on-one session the whole time for the entire day. And yeah, it was actually like a lot easier than I thought it would be, but they're really watching you and seeing how you work with others. So I luckily did get the conditional job offered that day and was set to go to training about a month later. So again, then when I started, it was at the end of January 2022. So from August 2021 to 6 months later, that's how long it took me for this entire process. We finally got there. So it was quite a long amount of time though to figure out what I was going to be doing with my life there.
And so did you just applied to one airline? And for listeners, so Betty, you work for a major American airline. We can't say which one in order to make sure that we're compliant with your
Company policies.
agreements with your employer, company policy. But one of the big ones. And were you only applying to that one, or you were applying to others?
I did just apply to this one. It was basically because of that friend that I had who told me to apply. I didn't even research any other airlines, but typically, so many people that I met at that in-person interview told me, "Oh, I've applied for this one and this one and this one." And they had a whole list of them, and we're just kind of going down the list, seeing which one they got accepted to first.
Okay, so very cool. So the interview process for becoming a flight attendant involves, them watching you and how you interact with other people because they want to make sure that you're a people person, which makes sense for the job. Now, do you have any tips for somebody who is applying for how to go through that or how to think about whether or not it's even the right job for them?
Yeah, I think people really need to make sure that they know what they're getting into. Like you said, you need to be a people person. And I think a lot of people go into this job thinking that they can get the travel benefits and, make their own schedule. And they're not really thinking about how much interaction they're going to have with people every single day. And I mean, you meet hundreds of people a day. So I think just knowing who you are as a person, if you're not someone who handles being around that many people or you don't really have that much interest in having to put on your customer service face and that whole, persona all the time. So I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge before you dive into this very long career of human interaction.
Any other tips for somebody who's thinking about applying to become a flight attendant to help them through that application process?
As cliche as it sounds, be yourself. They're really just looking to make sure that you're a nice, kind, outgoing person. And again, even if you don't have a whole bunch of stuff on your resume, that's not nearly as important as being a team player and showing up as a friendly, approachable person. Really, that's the biggest part. So when you get to that in-person interview, just have a smile on your face. That's actually a big thing. They're like, just be very smiley.
Okay, so you've got the conditional job offer to work for this airline. And now, presumably, they don't just put you right on a plane. There's a lot of training involved in that. You mentioned that earlier. Tell us a bit about what that training process looks like to become a flight attendant.
Sure, the training process was grueling. I don't think many people realize how intense training is, but yeah, it was one of the harder things I've done in my life. It was a lot of fun, but very challenging. So it was 7 weeks, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day on average. We got to training, were assigned a random roommate on the first day. I got lucky. I had the best roommate in the world who is still one of my best friends to this day, but it's kind of intimidating when you show up and you're living out of a hotel. So you get your room assignment with this stranger you've never met before. And training starts pretty much immediately, like the next day. They have an orientation day and then you go right into it. So the first week's very dry, very boring. It's tough too because those long days to start out with, like it's exhausting and it's very centered on company policy, just the very dry materials of learning all the ins and outs of the company that first week, and then you take an exam at the end of the week. So it's not the hardest week, but it's just long and kind of boring. And then the next week is when you learn your first aircraft doors. So it's when your basic aircraft, you take an entire week to learn how to arm and disarm this door. And you have to say everything verbatim how it is in the manual. So it's pretty wild that you have to like memorize this entire script. And as you are being watched by trainers when you do your testing, they're watching your every move, making sure that every word that you say lines up with your actions. And sometimes they're so strict that even if your verbiage is off by a little bit, you fail and you have to redo it. And so it's a really high stress week because it's our really like the first time we're getting put to the test. And so everyone has to pass this. And there are quite a few people who don't get past it just because they get really in their head. And it's hard to have to carry out this task that is so foreign to you because you don't know anything about planes before going into this unless you've been in aviation before, which most people aren't. So yeah, that's a grueling week. Once you get through that week though, then you go into evacuations. Evacuations are the worst week, in my opinion, because you're all on this trainer. So they have a retired aircraft in the building. It has a whole first class economy. It has the galleys, all the jump seats. It's completely set up as a real airplane. And they pair you into crews and give you these scenarios. You don't know what the scenario is going to be until you're in the moment doing your evacuation. So prior, they teach you about, aircraft disasters and crashes and all these times where crews in real life have had to evacuate the plane. And so we have these scenarios where it's, there's a fire in the cabin, the landing gear fails, things like that. And so if you so much as flinch in your brace position, like that's a fail. You get one chance to redo it. If you don't, you go home. The rest of the passengers are just your classmates and they're supposed to just pretend like they have no idea what's going on. And you have to make sure everyone gets off the plane within 90 seconds. That's the FAA requirement. And so the FAA, for those who don't know, is the Federal Aviation Administration, is a U.S. government agency within the Department of Transportation. And so it regulates all civil aviation in the United States, like air traffic control, aircraft certification, and airport standards. So when we're in training, we have to meet all the FAA standards. So like I said, when you're evacuating an aircraft, no matter what size aircraft it is, you must get every single passenger off within 90 seconds. So that's what they're grading us on, is that we get everyone off safely and we do all of our proper checks and then we get off. And like I said, people go home a lot on evacuations week. And I don't really know how it works with the company. I think you have to wait like 6 months before you can try to come back to training. But it's a really like high stakes time for evacs week.
So you go into training, but that doesn't mean that you're going to end up actually
No.
working through the job. Like a fair bit of people are, it's like, Hunger Games or something, kind of winnowing at each level.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense to me because safety is obviously incredibly important. So it makes sense that there would be a lot of rules and a lot of regulations. You need people to really, in an incident, like the passengers are going to be looking to the crew for assistance on that. So it makes total sense. And it's, we've had commercial aviation going for almost a century and actually overall is statistically incredibly safe, the safest way to travel. Okay, so you go through the classroom week, you go through learning how to disarm and arm the doors, how to do the demonstrations. You've got to go through this evacuation training. What comes after that?
Yeah, and so just to backtrack really fast when you said not everyone makes it through, my first class, I think we started with over 125 people. I think we graduated with 70. So that just kind of shows you how many people don't typically make it through the entire process. But anyway, back to the process of training. So yes, after evacuations, then it's briefings week, and that's for ditching. So for people who don't know what ditching is, which I didn't know before becoming a flight attendant, that's when you land in the water, which is very, very, very uncommon. Really, the only notable time that that's happened was the Miracle on the Hudson.
That's Captain Sully, right?
Captain Sully landing the U.S. Airways
Right.
plane in the Hudson River. So other than that, it's just such a rare thing. But obviously, we need to be trained on it. So that's when we have to get our passengers, our able-bodied assistants, to learn. We have to basically teach them how to operate a door in the moment while we're like preparing for this water landing. And we only have 5 to 10 minutes to do so, where we pull these assistants and say, this is how you will open this door and operate it if I am unconscious. This is how you do it if I am conscious. And you have to spit out all this information, which for me wasn't that bad because I'm very much so like a script-minded person. Like it kind of felt like theater, like I was memorizing my script and had to tell them exactly word for word what they needed to know. But I know it was a really hard week for a lot of people because it was just so much information that we had to deliver, again, pretty much verbatim for us to pass this. And yeah, that took a full week as well. The next week, you're learning every other aircraft door, which in my case, we have 6 different aircraft in our fleet. So, like I said, that one week was learning one door. Then this week is learning the other 5 aircraft one a day. So it's really expedited there. And you take an exam at the end of each day, learning each and every one.
Because every aircraft has a door that works a little bit differently then.
Every single aircraft is, some of them are vastly different, some are very similar. We also have different configurations of each plane, like dozens sometimes. Well, maybe not dozens, but around like 10 configurations for some planes.
For, like, how the seats are laid out and where the galleys are, the restrooms and all that, yeah.
Where the safety equipment is, everything is slightly different, which is quite annoying. But we just have to learn so many things and you have to have it down. But like I said, with it being like 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, like they're nailing that information into your brain. Like I still have dreams about evacuating a plane. Like once a month, I will have an evacuation dream and I'm like saying my commands. It's pretty wild. They really make you memorize stuff. But anyway, after that 5th week of aircraft doors, then the 6th week is when you're doing first aid. So they teach us everything from how to react to a stroke, to minor cuts and scrapes, to someone giving birth on a plane, to someone dying on the plane. Like it's this massive scope of injuries and accidents that we cover, as well as firefighting, where we actually don the portable breathing equipment that kind of looks like that beekeeper thing on your head, and you pull the pin on the fire extinguisher and you're putting out fires. And so that's a fun week, actually. And then after that is when we do our training flights, where they actually put us on a flight from our headquarters and we do a turn, which is when you go to one destination and come right back. So all of us had our different crews and we got to fly for real for the first time. And it was really exciting and nerve wracking. It was just a whole bunch of emotions. And the crew that, like the actual flight attendants who were scheduled for those flights, just got to sit in passenger seats. So they loved it. But, they got to answer our questions and help us out. And that was kind of like the stamp of approval at the end of all of this. And the final thing that happens is you take your final exam, which is a massive test that takes several hours on every single week, all the material you've learned over the past 6.5 weeks. Once you pass the final exam, it's graduation time. Then you're out and you're free. And once you get through it, you're just so exhausted and so grateful. And you've bonded with all of your classmates and you make some of the best friends ever.
So you've got 7 weeks, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. So you're talking, by the end of it, you're up to almost 500 hours just for the training process. And then after you're done with all that, now what happens?
So after that, you go to whatever base you were assigned. And my first base, I was given LAX, which was my dream base. I always wanted to live in LA. I believe they offered us 6. Sometimes they offer you 1. Sometimes they send the entire class to the same place. It's really just a need-based thing. You don't really have an option. But if you're lucky, you get to bid for whatever is your top preference and hopefully you get it. So yeah, 1 week after graduation, I started flying in LA. And they put you up in a hotel for 1 week and then you're on your own. You have to find your own home. And at the time I was very broke. Starting pay is also super, super low, which is unfortunate because every single base is in a major city in the US that is typically very expensive. So I lived in a crash pad. And so for those who don't know what a crash pad is, it's a flight attendant housing situation where it's just a ton of flight attendants who have typically bunk beds. Sometimes they're hot beds, which means you come in, you set up your bed, and then when you leave for a trip, you strip it, and then the next person comes and sleeps in that exact same bed. Or it's a cold bed situation where you come back and you have your exact same bunk bed all the time that you pay rent for, but it's significantly lower rent than, if you were to get an apartment or something like that. I was paying $400 a month for my bunk bed, and it was in a place that was really close to the beach, 5 minutes from the airport. So even though I had such a small space in this apartment, it was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment with 14 of us flight attendants living in it. But, we're not all there at the same time because we're all flying and we all have different schedules. So that was how I started out to save money. And since then, I've lived in like 3 different crash pads too, at different bases. So it's not an ideal way of living, but it's definitely manageable.
14 people in a two-bedroom.
Yes.
So you've got how many beds is that? Are you switching out the beds there? A hotbed situation?
No, mine was a cold bed situation, thankfully. I have done hotbed situations. It's just kind of a pain. That's really for like when I'm there way less. For example, I've been commuting from Phoenix to San Francisco for the last 10 months. And that is when I do a hotbed situation because I'm only staying overnight in San Francisco, like a few nights a month. But yeah, when I was living in LA, I was basically living at that crash pad. So I had my own little bunk bed with my put up my little photos around my bed and had my own bedding and yeah, it was an interesting time, but the girls I lived with were awesome. It was an all-girls one, some of them are co-ed, but yeah, it just kind of feels like college in a way.
Okay, so you're set up with your crash pad. We talked a bit about kind of what your personal situation looks like, but how does it look working as a brand new flight attendant? Tell us about that.
So there's 2 terms I want people to know. One is being on reserve, the other one is holding a line. So when you first start out as a flight attendant, you are on reserve, which means you're on call. And so this is it's a tough situation. It doesn't mean that you're on call for the entire month. It just means that you have certain days when you are on call, but it is, at least from my company, from midnight to midnight. So it means that they can call you to work a flight that they are short on people for at 2 a.m., noon, 8 p.m. It doesn't matter what time of day. Again, this is just from my company specifically, but I know that there are some companies that do reserve very differently. Sometimes they do it like every other month or just certain times of the day. But yeah, so when you first start out, because you have no seniority, this is a very, very seniority based job. So yeah, you're basically getting called to work the flights that people don't want to work. You're working days that people don't want to work, especially if you're on call for the holidays. You're going to work Thanksgiving, Christmas, or whatever holiday that you celebrate. New Year's, those are the times when people call out the most probably, which is obvious why. And so yeah, being on reserve is really tough. But then when you gain more seniority, you get to do what's called hold a line. And holding a line is night and day, so much better. It's when you get assigned your entire month for the month coming up and you know exactly what trips you're working. You know exactly what days you're working. You can see your crew, you can see everybody. You can trade trips with people, you can drop trips if someone picks it up. So holding a line is so much better than being on reserve because you just have the freedom to craft your schedule a lot better and you get to avoid the anxiety of having no idea where you're going next. So with time, this is something where, when I first started out and I was having these horrible days of just having really tough trips and no sleep and getting called in the middle of the night. And so many senior flight attendants were like, just hold on for a little bit longer. I swear, once you hold the line, it'll all be worth it. And just the last 2 months, I got to hold a line for the first time in over a year just because of how the seniority numbers worked out. And it was amazing. I actually got to be home for the holidays because I got to move my trips around and swap and drop. And compared to when I was on reserve, I didn't have the freedom to do any of that. So those are the 2 different forms of scheduling, holding a line or being on call.
And the reserve or the on-call, so that's typically the more junior flight attendants, and they're reserved to kind of just fill in wherever is needed. And so when you're doing that, you're at your home base and you're just kind of waiting for a call, or you're out and about,
Right.
or are you actually at the airport
No,
waiting?
so there's a difference between being on reserve and being on airport standby. If you're on airport standby, that means you're sitting at the airport for a period of 4 hours for those really, really last minute trips. That's like if a flight gets super delayed and that crew can't make it last second to their connecting flight, those people will fill in. Whereas on reserve, you have to have at least a 3-hour call out period to get to the airport. So those reserves will get assigned trips that start at least 3 hours later from when you get called.
Got it. And so you start as a junior flight attendant. The first, I guess, sounds like couple years or so, you're potentially on reserve the
Right.
entire time. Is that right?
Yes, and it's different again for all companies, but it also really varies by base. When I first started at LAX, I met quite a few flight attendants who told me that they were on reserve for the past 18 years because LAX was not opened up for new hires for all that time. And so their seniority remained so low. There weren't enough people transferring in for those 18 years. So they just remained at the very bottom of the barrel and they were on reserve for that long. And I just was like, how do you do that for almost 2 decades? I can barely do it. I mean, I've been doing it for 2 years and I'm already so like exhausted by it. So it's wild. There are some bases that get a lot more people, typically the bigger bases, the more international ones, and the smaller bases don't let in as many new flight attendants. And so those people might be on reserve for much, much longer.
So let's say when you are on reserve, like how do you schedule your life? Like if there's an important event or a wedding or
Oh.
something that you need to do,
Mhm.
like at what point do you have any certainty that you can even do that thing? Like you're looking how far out and how do you make those plans?
Well, like I said, you do have some days off. So typically you get assigned to be on reserve 18 days of the month and have 12 days off. It can fluctuate, but you can bid for your schedule the month prior. So if you know the date that you're supposed to go to a wedding or any event, you can try as hard as you can to bid for all of the schedules that line up with your personal life, but it doesn't always work out that way. So, I mean, I've had so many times where I got the schedule that I didn't want and I had to miss things. I've actually been pretty lucky myself with holidays and getting to attend holidays, but I know a lot of flight attendants who have missed weddings, funerals, their birthdays and big milestones, and it's tough. That's one of the harder things about the job, at least starting out, is that you really don't have much freedom with making your schedule the way you want it to be. That comes with seniority.
So let's talk. I want to talk a bit about what compensation looks like. Understanding that, there are many different companies and you only work for one, but are you able to say about kind of how the compensation works?
Sure. And just to preface this, I obviously am not telling anybody what company I work for, but everything that I am talking about is all on my own accord. And I do not represent the company by any means. I just have to say that contractually and everything. But yeah, let's
Your
talk about it.
personal opinion. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. But I can tell you a little bit, at least in my own personal experience, how my pay works. So we get paid when the brakes are released on the plane. I don't think a lot of people understand that. I think people think that flight attendants have this very glamorous life and get paid to travel all over and make all this money. And certainly with seniority, you do get paid a lot better. Your pay goes up yearly. And so when you've been there for years and years, the whole fact that you get paid when the brakes are released isn't so bad because you get a pretty good.
And when you say when the brakes are released, I
Mhm.
probably a lot of listeners are confused by that. As I understand what you're saying is that you're on the clock, but you're not paid for that time walking through the airport, getting to the plane, even getting everybody loaded. It's literally when the brakes are done and the plane starts moving. That's when your clock starts.
Yes. And so many times when I tell people this, they're just baffled. They have no idea. And I had no idea before this job too. Yeah, we don't get paid for boarding. At least my company doesn't yet. We're doing contract negotiations, which we've been dealing with for years now, hoping to get paid for that ground time. But no, we get paid when the doors have already been closed and the pilots are backing the plane up and, they're coming away from the gate. That's when our pay clock starts. I don't get paid for any time that I sit around in the airport waiting for connections. And sometimes those can be up to 4 hours long. I don't get paid for delays. For example, I was delayed about 6 hours the other day for a maintenance issue, and the flight was only an hour-long flight. So even though my whole crew sat there for 6 hours at this airport with passengers getting really upset and yelling at us and not having a good time, understandably so. We didn't get paid a dime for any of that. We got paid the 1 hour for the flight once we actually left. And so things like that are really frustrating about the job. Hopefully that changes soon. But yeah, I don't think a lot of people understand how our pay works. It's definitely not salaried, it's hourly, and there's very specific things that have to happen for that hourly clock to start.
So for our listeners out there, next time you're getting on a plane and you're walking on and there's a flight attendant greeting you with a smile, that flight attendant probably isn't getting paid. So be sure to smile back and be friendly to them.
Yeah, yeah. I think people are, for the most part, are very understanding. And I think some people do know that we don't get paid for boarding, but boarding is typically when the most problems arise and we have a lot of difficulties with passengers and baggage and all of that. And so it is pretty wild that we don't get paid during that time.
And so is the compensation entirely hourly or is there some sort of base component or there are other incentives or is it just purely based on hours?
We get paid per diem, which is the time spent away from base. So as soon as we leave on that first leg to when we come back, I think it's like around $2 an hour. So if you're on a 4-day trip, then you're getting paid, what is that, like 90 hours times two or something. So, it's a little bit extra. I kind of justify going out to eat and get meals with my per diem pay.
Got it. And okay, and about that, meals and hotels and stuff. So when you're on a stopover from your base, is there anything compensated in terms of food, hotels, where to stay, all that sort of stuff?
The hotels are paid for. Hotels and transportation, we get picked up at the airport either by a shuttle or a private driver, and the hotel is all arranged. It's prearranged, so we luckily don't have to pay for anything of that, but meals, no. We occasionally get meals on the plane, which I just don't like to eat the airplane food just because it's actually very tasty, but it gets old. I mean, you don't wanna eat it for 2 years straight like I have been. But yeah, they'll occasionally provide you a meal on the plane if you're working all day long with no breaks. Other than that, that's about it. It's the hotel and the transportation's paid for.
And then your per diem is expected to kind of cover the rest of that.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, so that's a little bit about compensation. I definitely want to ask you a bit about some of the benefits that people are probably wondering about, but we'll get to that in a minute. First, I just want to talk about what it's like on the plane, and particularly for listeners who maybe aren't as knowledgeable about sort of how aviation works. What are the different roles on a typical crew? And you talked earlier about how it's very different depending on the size of the plane and the layout and the configuration, but typically, you walk on the plane. Who are the other people that you're working with? Who are your coworkers? Have you met them before? Are they entirely new? And what are their roles?
Yeah, so for me, having been on reserve so long, I rarely fly with the same people. If I do, it's completely by chance. So typically, when I walk up to the plane at the start of a trip, I have not met a single one of these people in my life. We all are assigned a position and we keep that position for the remainder of the trip. So there's the lead flight attendant. There's different names for that lead flight attendant depending on the company, but purser is a common term that people might hear over the announcements. So the purser, as the lead, is the communicator in case things go wrong with the pilots. They're the one who makes the announcements, and they're kind of like the voice that you're hearing over the loudspeakers throughout the flight. And then you have the galley people. So there's the forward galley in first class and the back galley for economy. They're the ones who are setting up the drink carts, setting up the food. They're just organizing everything, which is one of my favorite positions because I really like to just like organize every single thing exactly like according to how I like to set it up. And then there's the cart person. And so this is on a very basic setup, like on a Boeing 737. And it's different when you get on a massive wide body aircraft like a 777 or a 787. Then there's, double the crew and everyone has their specific positions. And again, they keep that position. So if you're working a position that you haven't worked in a very long time, luckily we have an electronic manual that we can use on our work phones where we can fully review what that person's supposed to do in that position. You get to look at where all of your safety equipment and your checks are supposed to be. It's very helpful because lots of times you're flying a position you haven't flown in 6 months or a year or ever. So it changes every single trip.
And what about the economy versus business or first class? Is there a separation of the crew for the premium cabins, or is it just all together?
There is a separation, yes, but that doesn't mean that those people are totally confined to those areas. The purser typically is going to be going back and forth, checking in on the economy people. I mean, they're the ones up in front dealing with first class, but throughout the flight, you really just get to work as a team and you kind of fill in where people need more attention. So, yeah, we do have those designated cabins, but again, it's not like a strict role.
And what about communication with the pilots?
It depends every trip. Some pilots are very communicative and very on top of making calls, if there's turbulence or if whatever is going on with air traffic control. Other times it's like dead silent up there, which can be frustrating if you're trying to communicate with them about, oh, it's really bumpy back here. That's a big thing, like turbulence with pilots and flight attendants. There's always some tension about it because the pilots barely feel the bumps at the front of the aircraft. Meanwhile, the back of the plane is like going up and down and everyone's like falling all over the place. So that's something that we communicate the most with the pilots. Aside from that, it's really just if there's a medical emergency, we have someone who's attending to the person, and then we have like a runner communicator, and then there's the person who is relaying all the information to the pilots. So there's a constant cycle of communication that should be happening on every single flight.
So super interesting about the turbulence. So if somebody is particularly bothered by turbulence, does that mean that they're better off sitting towards the front of the plane or somewhere else?
Yes, I would say it does make a little bit of a difference if you're like in the very front of economy versus way in the back by the lavatories. You're definitely going to feel the bumps a lot more by the lavatories. But, not such a big difference that like it's not like somebody who's sitting at the front is going to be perfectly still and not feeling a thing versus the person in the back. everyone's gonna be feeling it at least a little bit if it's really bumpy.
Got it. And do you have any communication with anyone on the ground, or is it just you and the pilots are the ones doing that?
We don't, at least not when we're in flight. So that's a really common misconception with passengers, especially with delays. You know, passengers all the time, they'll stop me on the plane and say, "Hey, we're really last second to get to our connecting flight. Can you tell them to wait for us?" or something like that. And I'm like, as much as I wish I could tell your connecting flight ground control or ground crew to wait for you, there's absolutely no way that I can do that. Pilots are able to talk to the ground about medical emergencies or if there's something where they need to have law enforcement meet the aircraft, but we don't talk to anyone. The only time we are talking to anyone on the ground is when we're boarding and we're in communication with the gate agents, talking about how much bag space we have left on the plane is pretty much all we talk about.
Got it. Very interesting. Okay, now I want to ask you about the best and the worst things about your job. So maybe you want to start with telling us what are the best things about being a flight attendant?
The best thing about being a flight attendant, I think, is quite obvious, and that's the freedom to travel. I think more so than any other job in the world, you have the opportunity to travel far and wide, unlike any other career. And that's why I really wanted to do it because I've always been such a massive traveler. And it's really incredible the flight benefits that we do get. Again, different for every company, but at least with mine, I am able to hop on a ton of different airlines because we have an alliance with them. So whether I'm commuting or I'm going to have dinner with a friend for the night and then flying back home or flying across the world for a long trip, I typically can fly standby with, man, I don't even know how many airlines. I haven't actually counted, but I'm almost always able to get where I'm going on a whim for next to nothing or for free. So that part is amazing. And I also get to bring my parents with me, which is awesome, and one other traveler. So my boyfriend's on my benefits, and we get to go on some awesome trips together. We're actually going to Japan in 2 weeks because it's the really dead season in Japan. So we were like, might as well go. Hopefully, we'll get first class and we don't have to pay a dime for it, which is incredible. I just took my mom on a trip to Cancun for a wedding and saved all this money. And unfortunately, we had to go to a funeral just a couple weeks ago on a whim, too. And the fact that I got to get my mom there was just, it felt like I was in a way repaying her for like a little tiny bit of how much she's done for me throughout my entire life. So that's like a really massive reason why I wanted this job and why I continue to work this job because the ability to travel is so easy and it's a lot of fun for sure. There's also the factor of meeting some awesome people. Some of the best friends I've made in my entire life I have met on this job, whether they were a roommate that I met at the crash pad or my friends from training. Some of them I still talk to on a weekly basis. We had such a tight knit group. And then I also just meet such awesome people on my cruise. Again, like I said before, I don't know anybody going into these trips. And I come away from the trip 3 or 4 days later feeling like I know every single thing about that person. Like you really get to know people on the cruise as well as the passengers. There's some really nice passengers. So, yeah, those are some of the best things about this job. Also, with seniority, which I don't quite have this yet, but with time, you have the freedom to really craft your schedule. A lot of people have second and third jobs. Some people make this their side job once they have the seniority to really plan their schedule and get to have those travel benefits still, which is kind of like my goal in the end is to kind of do writing and journalism as my main job and then fly a little bit on the side, like a trip or two a month. So that's awesome. And I just know if I were to have an office job, I would lose my mind. I just am so not a person who can be stagnant doing the same exact schedule every single week. So that part's awesome.
And then I also want to ask you for my reference. So you're going out with a crew and you're going out with it for the same, like you said, you're spending 3, 4 days together. So you meet them on the plane, but then if you're not, until you come back to base, you're
Yep.
same plane, just different flights.
Different planes, different pilots, but your flight attendant crew usually is exactly the same throughout the whole time.
Got it. Got it.
Mhm.
Okay. That's helpful.
Mhm.
So on the subject of, you said you get to spend several days sometimes with the same crew. So they're new when you show up to that first flight, but then you're staying together until you kind of come back to base through several different flights together, at least sometimes. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. We are together for the entirety of the trip. Sometimes there's one position where you have a new person swapping out each trip, but there's typically like the core 3 people who you are with for the entire time.
Very cool. And on the subject of the free flight benefits, so you mentioned your boyfriend and your parents getting able to fly for free. What can you tell us about how that works and what somebody who is considering becoming a flight attendant might expect in terms of free flight benefits for themselves and for loved ones?
Yeah, of course. So the flight benefits, we have myriad of benefits, whether we're trying to fly completely free on standby or trying to buy a discounted ticket. So if you have something coming up where you like know you definitely have to be at this event, it's probably wise to buy a discounted ticket. I don't know the exact discount on those because I've never bought one. I always take my chances and fly standby because I'm cheap. But yeah, there's quite a few ways to travel much cheaper. And so standby, for those who don't understand the standby system, it's basically you get put on a list for a flight that you're trying to take. And depending on how many seats are open, you're kind of listed by seniority. And this depends on companies too, but mine is by seniority, where if they have a certain amount of seats left, they'll go down the list and allow those people to take the open seats because why not? They're open anyway. And so, yeah, that's typically how I traveled with my mom when I took her to Cancun. We were both on standby because I was able to look and see that those flights were not completely full, so I didn't feel nervous about getting her there that way. And the same thing with my boyfriend. We always whenever we travel, we actually kinda just look at what flights are open, and if we're trying to go on a trip, we'll just kind of go wherever is not crowded so we can kinda spread out on the plane. So, yeah, that's typically how it works, and domestically, it's free. Internationally, you'll typically have to pay an international tax, which can range from anywhere between, like, $50 to $300, but still way cheaper than if you're getting a round trip ticket on a massive airline that could cost, thousands of dollars. So it's a big I kind of factor that into my pay, even though I don't get paid a lot. I'm like, okay, but I'm going on all these trips for basically free. And that's kind of how I justify everything too.
And your family, how does that work for their benefits? And do they have to fly with you? Can they fly separately?
They can fly separately. Their seniority on the standby list goes down when I'm not flying with them. So there's like a whole system, all these different codes that I still don't fully understand, but there's a difference in where they're at on the list if I'm with them, where they're on my same level of seniority. If I'm not with them, I think they shoot to the bottom of the list, which is unfortunate. Doesn't matter if the flight's wide open, but, if it's only got a few spots, that's when it starts to get sticky. But yeah, the people who are on my benefits, there's only a handful, my parents and my boyfriend, they can fly with or without me. There's just a change in where they're at on the standby list.
Okay, so we've talked about the best parts of being a flight attendant. What are the worst parts, in your opinion, of being a flight attendant?
So there's definitely some cons to the job, as with any job, probably very different from other jobs though. So at least when you're on reserve, like I am currently this month, I just went back on reserve. Like I said before, that's when you're on call. That's really tough because your sleep schedule can get really messed up. And there's a lot of anxiety that comes with going to bed, wondering if they're going to call me in 1 hour, in 5 hours, or if they're going to call me at all. So I have really sleepless nights when I'm on call like that. And I do feel quite a bit of anxiety that I never really felt before this job, where I just feel like my typical day to day routine is just completely off because I just don't know when they're going to call me. So that's a tough part. Also, like when I was based in New Jersey, there were times where they would send me to Europe and I'd be there for 24 hours. And then I'd come back and I'd have my minimum rest, which according to the FAA is 12 hours. I would sleep for 12 hours. They'd call me right away to go to California. So right there, within the span of 3 to 4 days, it's like a 9-hour time difference, and my body just could not keep up. And so that's a really tough part of the job is it takes a really big toll on your body. So that's why it's really important to take care of yourself, which we'll get into later, how I stay healthy and how I take care of myself. But yeah, just a very different environment and schedule from most other jobs where you're going to the same place in the same city on the same schedule all the time. Another con is, sometimes people can be difficult and sometimes they'll say and do things that might hurt your feelings, which anybody in customer service can understand. I mean, working in bars and restaurants all through college, I dealt with the same kind of people. The only difference is when you're on a plane, you can't really get away from them. So when you do have troublesome passengers, it can make a difference in how you're feeling about the day. So it's just important to take a deep breath and not try to internalize things and move forward. I always just remind myself, I'm never going to see this person again. But yeah, I think the people are not so much a negative part of the job. If anything, they're more a benefit with the really nice people you meet. but I think more so it's just the toll that the job takes on your body. Again, when you do get to hold a line, then you can plan whether you're going to work in the morning or work a red eye, whatever works best for you. And you're not just getting tossed into whatever and throwing off your whole schedule. So that's when you get a more stable lifestyle. And at that point, really all you have to deal with is the good parts of the job. I'm still waiting on that time. I think I still have a couple more years of seniority to gain to really have the schedule that I want in my own personal life.
So on the subject of difficult passengers, I mean, obviously, besides not being a jerk and just being generally nice to customer service folks, I sometimes wonder as a passenger if there's anything I'm doing maybe unintentionally that's kind of like annoying to the flight attendants. Are there any particular common things that passengers do that annoy you?
I think the most annoying thing for me personally is when people poke me or touch me. I really, really hate that. I mean, I don't think anybody at work wants to be touched by a stranger, but a lot of times when I'm especially working in economy and people are asleep or, appear to be asleep, and I'll be going by them and then suddenly their eyes shoot open and they're like, "Wait, you skipped me." I'm like, "I didn't skip you, you were asleep." But they'll turn around and like grab my jacket and tug on my sleeve or poke me. And I'm just like, "Don't touch me." So that's something if you're listening, don't ever touch a flight attendant or anybody, it's like have some like spatial awareness too. And, you can ring your call bell in that case and say, "Hey, can I get something?" You don't have to touch us. Also, like on that note, people will come into the galley areas, which is, where we're preparing the food and the drinks, which they're very confined spaces, tiny, tight little space. People will come in there and just be like, "Oh, I need to stretch my legs." And they'll like start doing a full-blown yoga session, and I'm just like, "What are you doing? Like, I have to work. This is my workspace. You can't be in here just, like, doing the splits and stretching out your legs like this." So and that happens a lot on long-haul flights. So I think it's just a matter of personal space. That's a huge thing. I mean, it is hard on an airplane. There isn't a lot of space to work with for the passengers or the crew, but really that's my biggest annoyance. Other than that, don't vape on the plane. That's huge. It's so annoying when I have to tell like, I'll see it in someone's hand and I'm like, "Don't make me come back and talk to you about this," because it's a huge thing, like, vaping is so easy now compared to smoking, and, back in the day when people were allowed to smoke on the planes, it was a very obvious thing. Vaping is such a secretive thing that people can do now, but still, when they go into the lavatory, I've had it happen where someone has set off the fire alarm, and I want everyone out there to understand that depending on the pilots, there are some pilots who just have a vengeance for vapors, I guess is what you call them. And if the pilots learn about someone vaping on the plane and like the fire alarm is set off, some of them have no mercy and they will have law enforcement meet you at the plane and you will be fined thousands of dollars just for pulling out your vape and hitting it once on the plane. So that's one thing I don't think a lot of people realize, especially my friends who all vape like I've told them because 'cause they'll be like, "Oh, like, sometimes I just really wanna just do it on the plane and no one will notice." And I'm like, "It's not worth it. Just don't do it," because if there's a flight attendant who immediately alerts the pilots and the pilots are not having it, you could be spending so much money and then have to talk to the cops when you land. So that's just something I want people to know about.
Very interesting. So, what are other things that someone can do to just try to be a good passenger with respect to the crew?
I think really just being respectful and recognizing that this is a shared space. You're on the plane with a ton of different passengers. And I know being on an airplane is not the most comfortable environment to be in, of course. But, just having your items be compliant is huge and trying to make space for just what you have. I think it's really important, like, especially when we have a full flight and we have these passengers sometimes who put like every single thing that they own in the overhead bins. And then someone comes on and then they can't fit their own bag because someone put, their shopping bags and everything up there. So, I mean, it's just a thing where it's like, hey, have respect for your fellow passengers, have respect for the crew, and just try to always follow crew member instructions and kind of keep to yourself. I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking for things on the plane or asking for help or having questions, but always just communicating in a respectful way is really all that flight attendants are asking for from the passengers.
So, what are some common misconceptions about being a flight attendant?
The biggest misconception about being a flight attendant is that it is a glamorous job. That is the word that I heard the most before starting this job. "Oh, it's so glamorous." And no, it is not. There are certainly times where it can feel like it is, but for the most part, we have such long and exhausting days. I mean, typically for me, I'll work a 15-hour day, and that's really common, and I rarely work anything less than a 10-hour day, and, it can be really exhausting, especially when you're working back to back, and even when you do go to a really cool destination, sometimes you're so tired from the flight and the lack of sleep that you've had and all the people that you've been around that you're so drained, you can't really even enjoy that place, and that's been my case a couple of times where I felt so excited about a really cool destination that I'd never been to, and then when I got there, I was so tired that I was like, "Oh, I'll take a quick little nap," and then ended up falling asleep for 10 hours and, missing out on the whole place, and so things like that happen a lot, and, we are cleaning up messes a lot, like, babies will have accidents all the time, and we're on our hands and knees scrubbing bodily fluids out of the ground, it's not a glamorous job, let me tell you. So, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions because you see in the movies these flight attendants who have their little hat on and their makeup's perfect and they look so great and they look like they're just living the life flying here and there and they don't have a care in the world, but that's not how it actually goes in real life. Another misconception for sure is the promiscuity of flight attendants. And while this can be true for sure for some people, I don't think a lot of people realize how many flight attendants are in very serious relationships or have families. Like, a lot of people think it's the job for a young single person and that's it. Not that that doesn't happen because it for sure does happen. I mean, you're in this work environment where you're in a brand new place meeting so many more people than the typical job. So it makes sense why that is a stereotype and a common misconception. But there's a lot of us who have very normal personal lives.
Any interesting stories that you have from working as a flight attendant?
I have tons of stories. Pretty much every trip warrants a new story. More recently, I was working a flight to Cabo and there was an old man in the back of the plane and I'm picking up trash. Luckily, I have my gloves on. And I was picking up the garbage and he has this cup that's full to the brim and he starts pouring the liquid into my trash bag and he goes, "It's not water." And I was like, "Sir, what are you talking about?" And then he points to the line for the bathroom, which was pretty long. He says, "You think I'm gonna wait in a line of 6 people to go to the bathroom? You're crazy." And so, at this point, he's finished pouring his entire cup into my bag, and I realized that he peed in his seat into this cup and then just dumped it into my trash bag before my very eyes, and it was really stinky and gross, and I was like, "You are so disgusting." I didn't even have words in the moment too, like, someone had to go talk to him after because I genuinely didn't know what to say to him. And because it was a bodily fluid, we had to lock up that trash bag. We had to, double bag it, put it in one of the lavatories, and lock it for the remainder of the flight. So then we had an even longer line for the bathroom, all because he did that, and it was so gross. And, yeah, people do a lot of nasty things on the plane all the time that I'm just like, "What was going through your head when you decided to do this?" But that was not fun. But on a lighter note and less gross note, I got to meet Napoleon Dynamite, and I was working in first class, and he was asleep up there. Sorry, the actor who plays Napoleon Dynamite, John Heater. I just call him Napoleon Dynamite. But you do get to meet quite a few celebrities in this job, but he was the most notable one to me because I love that movie. I've loved it my whole life. And I went up to him after I composed myself, and I was like, "I'm such a big fan." He was such a sweetheart. For the most part, celebrities are super nice, but I try to just leave them alone when I meet them because, it's probably super annoying to have a bunch of flight attendants taking photos with you and that type of thing. But yeah, that was fun.
On the subject of celebrities, are there any instances in which you're, like, told in advance that, "Hey, this very important person is going to be on the plane"?
We are, yes. A lot of times there'll be a celebrity who has like bodyguards and they're waiting out in the boarding area. And so the pilots or somebody, the gate agents will notice them and then they'll immediately tell us. And also, there are sometimes where celebrities tell us ahead of time, like, "Hey, I don't want to be bothered. Can you make sure the rest of the crew knows?" And so we'll have to pass that information along and just give them their privacy and their space. But yeah, a lot of times I have no idea. A lot of times a flight attendant will be like, "Can you believe who's up there in first class?" And they'll tell me who it is, and I'm like, "I have no idea who that person is." I'm really bad with names and faces too, so I've probably seen my fair share of celebrities and not recognized that they were a celebrity. But yeah, it depends. Every single flight that has a celebrity on it, they kinda have different interactions.
Yeah, I imagine that's probably especially more common for flights coming in and out of California,
Oh, yeah.
that you have a lot of those.
Tons of them from LA especially.
Any other interesting stories?
Yes, I am going to refer you all to my episode with Laura McFarland about her trip to Lombok, which was our number one place to travel on our list of the top 50 destinations in 2025. She and I actually discussed this story in that episode when I got deported from China, which technically I was denied entry from China, but the government officials told me we're deporting you. So that's what I tell people. But it was just a whole snafu with me flying there on a work trip and showing up in Beijing with the wrong visa. And it was horrendous. It was the worst travel experience of my life. I actually wrote an article about it. It's one of my perspective pieces if you want to check that out on travellemming.com/perspectives. And you can read the whole story there. But I'll just tell you it wasn't fun and very traumatic experience. And from here on out, I'm triple, quadruple checking that I have the correct visas everywhere that I go in the world.
Yeah, everyone go check out episode 5, which is titled Lombok. And that's where Betty's with our guest host, Laura, to talk more about that story. Or you can read her article by just going to your favorite search engine and searching Travel Lemming Deported from China. And that article will come up. Okay, next, Betty, a couple quick rapid fire questions for you here. First off, are there any particular like layover airports that you like, both domestically and internationally?
Sure, my favorite domestic layovers were Kalispell, Montana, and this is in no particular order, but Kalispell, Montana in the fall, because the fall leaves are incredible. It's absolutely stunning there. I love that layover. It's probably, well, that probably is my top one. Santa Barbara, California, because we get to stay right on the ocean, and I would go on a little run and then get my coffee at the docks, and it's so, so lovely there, and the weather's always perfect. And then Portland, Maine, this is definitely my favorite East Coast destination. I love the lighthouses. I love the architecture and the coffee shops. It's so beautiful there, and the people are really sweet. My favorite airport of all time, though, is Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's like a five-gate tiny airport with like antler archways everywhere, and it's got the view of the Tetons right there. And if you haven't been to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, flying in there is a whole other experience from any other airport. I love it there. Internationally, my favorite layovers have been Edinburgh, Scotland, which they put us on the Royal Mile. For anyone who doesn't know what the Royal Mile is, that's where they have like the whole, it's like the downtown historic area with all these gorgeous, beautiful brick buildings, and it leads to the Edinburgh Castle. And there's some great bars, some great food. And then on the other side of the world, Narita, just outside of Tokyo, was one of my favorite layovers because you get to walk through all these pedestrian streets all the way to this gorgeous Japanese temple, and there's waterfalls, and there's all these little pop-up shops along the streets, and you get matcha, and you get to get ramen, and it's just such a quaint little Japanese city, like, outside of the chaos of Tokyo. And then also Hong Kong. Hong Kong's always been one of my favorite cities in the entire world. I was there back in 2019. But when I went there on a layover, my crew and I took the tram to the very top of the mountain there where you can see a lookout of the entire skyline. And Hong Kong has probably the most impressive skyline I've ever seen. And it's just so gorgeous there. There's awesome food and tons to do. So those are just a few of my favorites, but I definitely have a long, long list of the best layovers.
Yeah, for anyone who's transiting through Tokyo, I know Narita in particular is absolutely worth leaving the airport if you have more than, 5 hours or so because you don't have to go all the way into Tokyo, just go to this small little town, and like you said, it's the train takes you right there, and they've got a temple and all that stuff, so I have more than 5 or 6 hours, I always like to try to get out of the airport, even though if I have a lounge pass and stuff, even still, it's good, what's the point of traveling if you're not maximizing kinda every minute of it. Very cool. How about tips for staying healthy? You're traveling all the time. A lot of people, I have a friend who feels like he gets sick every single time he goes on a plane, and yet you're on planes every day. So, what health tips have you picked up?
Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of people. I know people who also say that when they're like, "Oh, every single time I have to fly, I come home with a cold." And so the first few months of this job, probably the first 6 or 7 months actually, I was sick all the time. I think I got COVID twice. I got some other god awful flu. I was bedridden so many times with just whatever I was picking up from flying so much, and I think in combination with the lack of sleep, it was very easy for me to get sick. So now I think I've surpass that time of, being a very new flight attendant to where my immune system has gotten built up a lot more. So now it's pretty rare that I get sick. But there's a few things I do to stay healthy while flying. So water is massive, especially because you get way more dehydrated when you're flying. So it's important to just drink water, water, water all the time. I try to drink one of those like really giant liter bottles every single flight, and just to stay hydrated all the time. I try to eat healthy. I sleep like crazy. Like sometimes when I get back from trips, I will sleep for like 15 hours straight. Like I've woken up to my boyfriend poking me, like thinking I was dead because I just didn't wake up because I just sleep and sleep and sleep. And before I used to feel guilty about it because I thought I was kind of like wasting my days off. But now I give myself a lot of grace with this job, and I allow myself to rest when I feel like I need rest, which is a lot because it's an exhausting time flying all over the world all the time, you know? And skincare is a big thing. Your skin gets really dry on the plane. I have some certain products that I use to make sure that my skin stays healthy. I take my vitamins and wear the proper shoes with compression tights. Compression tights are huge because blood circulation to prevent swelling and like varicose veins later in life. It's huge to stay on top of that from the very beginning. So I always wear my special compression tights, and I try to wear like my inserts with my heels so that my feet don't get messed up. But yeah, you once you get into the swing of this job, you start to figure out what works for you and what makes you feel your strongest and your healthiest. It definitely takes a while, but like right now, I feel like I have a pretty good system going, and I feel like I am a fairly healthy flight attendant.
Okay, well, we're kind of coming to the end of the interview here, but I have a couple just big picture questions for you as we wrap things up. Like, as you're sort of reflecting on your experience being a flight attendant, are there any particular observations or sort of realizations that come to mind?
I think my biggest realization with this job is that people are really not themselves when they're on an airplane or even in an airport. It's a very high stress environment, and it's just unique. It's nothing like anywhere else that you could be. And so I try to give people a lot of grace on the planes because emotions are heightened. Common sense kind of just goes out the window sometimes, and not everyone really behaves reasonably, and you really have to have a lot of patience with this job. Patience is huge, and I think I am already a fairly patient person, but this job has tested that many a time. But everyone has their own things going on in their lives, and so it's really important for me to treat them respectfully and give them grace, like I said, and recognize that they could be traveling for a funeral or something really traumatic has happened in their lives, and recognizing that what I say and do to them impacts them in that moment. And so I really just try to be kind. People travel for so many different reasons, and it's important to be kind to each other.
Always good advice. Okay, last question. If, for the listeners out there who listen to this episode or maybe thinking about pursuing being a flight attendant as a career path, what would you say to them?
I would tell somebody who wants to become a flight attendant that, this job has completely changed my life. There's so many incredible benefits to it, and you get to see the world. No 2 days are the same. It's not at all like a typical office job or really any other job in the whole world. Aviation is so unique. It's definitely not always amazing. It can get lonely, especially when you're on long trips and you're away for a long time from the people you care about. But if you're a people person, if you love to travel, and you know what you need to lead a fulfilling life, and this sounds like something that excites you and you want to give it a shot, I think that it's a great fit for someone like that, and you should give it a go and just apply. And I think right now, especially post COVID times, all the airlines were booming, like trying to get tons of flight attendants, they're trying to get tons of pilots. So if either of those career paths interest you, now's the time to go for it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Betty. Really appreciate you answering it. I've learned so much today. I actually feel like I have probably 100 more questions here that I could ask you. And we already have one of our longer recording sessions that we've ever had. But for listeners at home, if you have a question that I failed to ask as the interviewer, go to YouTube and you can leave that as a comment there. And then Betty hopefully can pop on and answer some of your questions.
Yes, I love answering people's questions about this job. I think all the time people don't expect the answer that I give them. So if you have anything that you want to ask me about or anything I need to clarify, feel free to drop those comments on YouTube. I will be responding diligently after this recording.
And while you're there on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed. Did you know most people who listen to this podcast are not subscribed? We've got a lot of interesting podcasts coming, so hit that subscribe button. Like this episode, it takes a lot of effort from our team to put these together, so we really appreciate hearing that thumbs up from you. It takes a second, but really helps us out. If you love this episode, you'll probably love our other episodes because did you know that Travel Lemming has a team of dozens of travel experts? Not all of them are flight attendants like Betty, but we all have lots of different expertise and we have our team come on for different episodes. So subscribe to our podcast and listen to everything we've got going on. You can also find thousands of guides to destinations all around the world and to all sorts of topics related to travel, written by Betty, written by myself, and written by Travel Lemming's entire team of dozens of travel experts. So if you've stuck with us all the way to this end of this episode, you should probably be a member of the Travel Lemming community. So be sure to subscribe and be sure to go to travellemming.com. You can sign up for our email list to stay in touch with us. Or if you're in one of our 8 meetup cities, we actually have in-person community meetups going on. So just go to your favorite search engine, put in Travel Lemming in the name of your city, and you'll see what we've got going on near you. Well, that's all we've got for this episode. I think it's been super fascinating. Betty, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us all about this. And that's it. We'll see you in the next one.
Yes, thank you all so much for being here and listening to all the ins and outs of my life as a flight attendant. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time.